Hello and welcome to this episode of A Focus On, coming to you from the 54th World Economic Forum meetings in Davos, Switzerland. In this episode, we focus on the efforts that Team South Africa has made to position the country as a prime investment destination of choice. This is what Ibrahim Rasool, the chairperson of the Development Bank of Southern Africa, had to say.
Look, I think that we understand that South Africa is open for business and open for investments. But in the spirit of the overall theme of the World Economic Forum of rebuilding trust, we understand that before you harvest investments, you've got to plant the seeds of trust. And South Africa has to earn the trust of the investment community of the world, and we do so by showing that we have overcome some of the challenges, or we are overcoming some of the challenges that have creeped in the past. Secondly, that our fundamentals are coming back into place, that the rule of law is again beginning to assert itself, that the institutions are being rebuilt and being renewed from the negative influences that there have been, and that we have bankable projects. Most importantly, we have bankable projects. And I think that that's the combination that wins trust and then leads to the harvesting of investment.
Absolutely. So, of course, your job is double-pronged. You bringing that message, but you also, importantly, I think, coming to listen, right? And I wanted to hear some of the messaging that you have gotten back when you pitch about the story that South Africa is open for business.
I think that we need to cut through a lot of noise from what I'm hearing. Before you can get to the message of the investment, people want to know, okay, have you sorted out your issues on Ukraine? Have you sorted out your issues on Gaza?
That's distracting, right?
That is distracting, but you have to answer it. And I think that our message there is very clear, because more than half the audience, you just walk around with your South African flag, more than half the audience comes to congratulate South Africa for its moral compass on global and geopolitical issues in the world. And so how do you turn the admiration from half of the world into investments? And how do you turn the confusion in the other half into clarity? And so that's what we are hearing. And so a lot of the time is not spent in the sessions. A lot of the time is spent on the conference floor, in which you are engaging those kind of people, speaking to the morality that some admire and speaking to the skepticism that others are having.
What are you saying to those that are saying perhaps you are sacrificing your economic interests as South Africa on the, shall I call it, the moral altar in order to be seen to be doing right? Is that costing South Africa critical investment money?
It requires explanation, and not convoluted explaining, because then you confuse people more.
Right.
I have a very simple way of engaging people by saying, for me, foreign policy and economic policy is like a telescope. It has two lenses. One is the lens of your values, the other is the lens of your interests. And the two lenses must be consistent. And therefore, when South Africa acts morally, that is the best guarantee that its interests are going to be best secured. And we don't sacrifice the one for the other. And so I think that when we are able to explain that, I think we're getting through. Although we must persuade, particularly the Americans in the audience, that they can't be punitive with South Africa. And I think we are winning that battle. I think our explanations are working. So the primary objective is to maintain what we have. The second objective is to get more investments and more trade. And I think what Team South Africa is doing here is really instrumental in winning those battles.
When you listen to the people that are engaging you, when you listen to the people that want to know more about the economic opportunity that is in South Africa, what are you hearing the most in terms of things that investors are concerned about? Outside of the noise, perhaps.
I think that the message we have is that just as the world is in transition, South Africa is also only 30 years old, and its transition is continuing. But South Africa finds itself in a wonderful internal transition in which we are transitioning from, for example, fossil fuels to renewable.
Right.
So look for the opportunity to come into South Africa and assist the renewable revolution that is taking place in generation, in transmission, in distribution. Invest in our energy. It's another way of saying that what looks like problems for us in South Africa, like load shedding,
Yes.
must be an investor's dream to come and paint their picture in terms of solving that problem.
Yeah.
The brick walls that we are hitting with water supply,
Yeah.
that is waiting for investors to come with problem-solving technologies and problem-solving. The fact that Africa and South Africa are not beholden to old technologies means that we are probably the continent that is ripest for artificial intelligence, for AI. Just like we were the ripest for cell phone technology,
True.
we led the USA on banking on our phones. So what we need to convince the world
Yeah.
is that there's an enormous amount of bankable projects that's waiting, that our problems are their opportunities, and that as a chairperson of the DBSA, I am willing to say to all of them, we are not inviting you to come and take all the risks. An institution like the DBSA, the Development Bank of Southern Africa,
Yeah.
puts some of its money up front
Yeah.
so that we share the risk with you
Yeah.
as we begin to reap these opportunities.
That was Ibrahim Rasool, the chairperson of the Development Bank of Southern Africa. The world is a tricky place to manage right now. Risks dominate globally and locally. Richard Tregus, the Chief Risk Officer at Old Mutual, shared his thoughts on managing some of the macroeconomic headwinds, but also spelt out where he is seeing opportunity. We are here at the World Economic Forum, and what we have heard is while the world might be while the world might have the worst of the pandemic and the COVID-19 crisis behind it, there is a whole lot more crises currently out there. In fact, the Chief Economist survey of the World Economic Forum was just talking about how more than half of the chief economists that have been surveyed were concerned about the outlook of the global economy and concerned about weakness. So as a chief risk officer, when you are looking at all the headwinds, perhaps even opportunities that are out there, but what is top on your radar?
Political events affect everything. They affect us in SA, so it's really helpful just to understand what's going on in the world, how do the leaders of the world, how they think about it, what are the potential solutions. There's a theme of resilience, and I think it's in my role that's what I aim to create in our organization, making sure that we are resilient, that we'll ride through whatever storms we see during this year and in the longer term, but at the same time understanding the opportunities that are there so that we can also take some bets on the future. And the flip side of risk is opportunity, so it's looking at both the downside and the upside.
So just maybe if we look at the both and how you are balancing the equation. I mean, you were talking about political risk and the fact that over half of the world's economies are going into election this year. It does present quite a bit of political risk, particularly in key markets like South Africa, where that outcome is a little bit uncertain. But if we maybe reflect on some of the conversations that you have been having here at the World Economic Forum so far, as you do say that it's your first, just perhaps some key takeaways.
Well, there's so many topics. But let's start with the overall theme. It's rebuilding trust. And I don't think you could pick a theme that's more relevant than that. I think that's really, if you look at the challenges facing the world at the moment, you can't solve them without trust. And trust has been broken in many ways. It's broken between leaders and people. It's broken between nations. And I think it's very relevant for SA as well. We need to rebuild trust. We came through a tough period, a lot of things not working well. There's a sense that our political system is not working for the majority of people. So that's a theme that's playing out. And then with some of the other sub-themes like artificial intelligence, how do you create jobs, climate change, trust is also very important. If we think about how we tackle climate change and the massive transition we have to undertake, you can't actually do that without some level of disruption and big change in people's lives. And there's often a fear that This could be negative for certain groups, or so. You have to start with trust and build that by having open conversations.
So when but you're doing your job, I imagine that as your fellow board members and fellow members of the executive are thinking about opportunity, they rely on you quite heavily just to scan through those opportunities and the risks and whether it's commensurate of the reward. A lot of African countries are here at this World Economic Forum, and some of which Old Mutual does have operations in. Just, I suppose, your assessment of the risk landscape on the continent right now in 2024. I suppose it really is a question around outlook and where you are seeing opportunity.
Yeah, well, let's pick a few. One of the issues that has been very relevant over the last few years has been the level of debt. And that's not just on the African continent. Around the world, including the US, debt levels are historically at an all-time high. And that does, that raises a real question around whether there will be consequences down the line, governments not being able to afford the level of interest. And Africa has also been really affected by that. So through COVID, negative impact on economic growth and government revenues, we've seen quite a weakening of the fiscal position of many governments. We had the Ghana crisis last year, and there are other countries that are similarly vulnerable. So that's one of our concerns, because banks, financial services companies, insurers, we all, we rely on a sound sovereign. So that's one of the issues. And I attended a very interesting talk this morning with people from different parts of the world, all talking about the level of debt and whether governments actually need to be a lot more responsible and, even if it's politically unpopular, actually really try and pull debt in. So that's one. What we really need is economic growth in every market that we operate in. That's key, and I think it's fair to say we've had some headwinds for the last few years, and we're really hoping that 2024 might be an easier year. But firstly, we need inflation to come down, and that'll enable interest rates to reduce. That'll be good for SA, because while US interest rates are high, it's capital doesn't flow to emerging markets like ourselves, so our interest rates have to remain high to attract that capital. Yeah, the other really interesting theme, it's been very prevalent, is artificial intelligence. So that I found that fascinating, just hearing how people are thinking about AI, and particularly generative AI. I think the world will look back at 2023 and say, well, that was this watershed year where this new type of AI emerged, and that it's as big as when the internet began.
Is your job safe?
I hope my job is safe. I have wondered whether I can employ AI to help me with some of my more grad sort of work. But that's I think the theme that's played out is it has this duality to it. So there's on the one hand a lot of concern around what could AI mean for our lives and particularly jobs. I think that's the main fear of a lot of people, that could this replace my job? But mostly I've heard people being positive about it, saying we should actually see it as even as a bit of a gift, and we should use it well. And for people, embrace it, because it can make your job a lot more interesting, because it can take the graduate away. It can help you to do it better. You're basically tapping into new knowledge in a very accessible way. So it's not something to fear and not to run away from.
And that was Richard Tregus, the Chief Risk Officer over at Old Mutual, helping us wrap up this episode of Focus On with myself, Fifi Peters. See you next time.